In this episode, we're going to try and get past the debate on JPEG versus RAW and RAW versus JPEG and Jared and Tony. I want to talk to you about the simple reality of a technique that will help you improve your photography faster if you shoot JPEGs. Stay tuned. Hey gang, how's everybody doing? 2 weeks, it's been a while. I miss you guys. Check in, let me know you're here, let me know where you're from. Thanks for tuning in, and my apologies that we couldn't make last week happen, but stuff happens. I'll share all of it soon, but not quite yet. So tonight, I want to try and get past that big debate that always goes on, which is better, RAW, JPEG, RAW, Tony says one thing, Jared says another, and then there's that angry guy, he's got to weigh in on a whole bunch of crap. Look, at the end of the day, RAW files are better. That's a fact. And I'm going to go over that stuff just so that we can kind of get a benchmark. So I want you to stick with me. I'm not going to need a whole hour for this. At least I don't think I will. I really don't. I am actually looking forward to being able to do a little Q&A with you guys tonight. So type in some questions. It's been a while since we've solved some problems together. So what's going on? What are you working on? What are you struggling with? Type some stuff in and we'll get to that. But I want to start out with, the never ending debate in photography. RAW versus JPEG. Some people say shoot in RAW, others say shoot in JPEG. Look, here's the thing, okay? RAW format is essentially like having a digital negative. And I'm going to give you some of the pros and cons between both RAW and JPEG files. But here's what you need to know. And here's what you need to remember. RAW file has the most information and gives you the most leeway. It's a bigger file. JPEGs are compressed. They've already eliminated some of the message, some of the detail, the information, and you can't do as much with them. But here's the simple reality, folks. It's like most other things in photography. It's not as easy as saying, always shoot RAW, always shoot JPEG, this is better, and so on. You just can't say that because there are plenty of scenarios where shooting JPEGs make more sense, especially from a business perspective, right? So it's not a debate. That's the point. So let's get to the facts, right? Every digital camera that's on the market today shoots RAW and JPEG, especially interchangeable, cameras, like, mirrorless, etc. They shoot RAW and they shoot JPEG. RAW files are bigger, JPEGs are smaller because they're compressed. So I made a little list here because I know I'll leave something out if I don't go down the list. So obviously one of the big things with RAW files, in addition to being this kind of concept of a digital negative, more shades, more depth in the tonality ranges, more dynamic range, more of a wider color gamut is possible, right? So, generally JPEGs are going to be 8 bits. That's it. So an 8-bit image can only hold up to 16.8 million colors. So that's basically 256 tonal values for red, blue, and green channels in the file. That's it. 12-bit RAW, by comparison, from that 16.8 million, a 12-bit RAW can contain up to 68.7 billion, 4,096 tonal values per color channel. So it's just a lot more data. There's more to work with. And then, keep in mind, if you go up to like 14-bit RAW, it gets into the trillions. It's like an insane number. I'm not so sure that too many of us need that, but it's important to understand it is an option, right? 16-bit RAW, it's like 281, I think, trillion colors. Like crazy, crazy, crazy number, okay? So You know, the difference between like a 16-bit RAW and a JPEG, it's like 16.8 million times larger in terms of its color range. So a lot of information there, right? The big thing which most photographers get all excited about when it comes to, RAW versus JPEG, etc., you've got a wider dynamic range, meaning simply you are able to retrieve more in post from your highlights and your shadows because of that dynamic range, as well as, the color gamut, right? Um, Short way of saying it, it's going to kind of save your butt, right? It just will. Now, that doesn't mean you sit back and say, oh, cool, I don't really have to worry about getting my exposure dialed in just right. I'll work it out in post. No, it's not guaranteed to save your butt. It will not always save your butt. In some cases, it will save your butt, meaning if your exposure is off just a little, right? Just will. So obviously, because your raw file is not compressed and because you have all of these extreme numbers of colors available per channel, and because you've got a wider dynamic range and a wider color gamut, that also means that you can do much finer and more precise adjustments to a raw file than you can a JPEG file, right? Also, with a raw file, you can adjust the color space after the image leaves the camera because it's not baked in. So it's kind of like white balance, right? You can adjust it afterwards. Color space, sRGB, Adobe RGB, it's not saved in the raw files. So you can change it to any color space you want when you go into Lightroom or when you go into Photoshop. It's an option. Raw files, while we're on the pluses for raw files are lossless, meaning you haven't lost any data. They are full and complete. JPEG images are generally lossless compression unless you specifically pick lossy raw compression, which you can do. Some cameras offer that opportunity now. Personally, myself, I don't use it. I just go for the straight raw file. Hard drive space is cheap compared to what we spend on cameras and lighting and gear and everything else. So for me, I buy the hard drives. Okay. But raw images are lossless. There's absolutely no compression. You're getting everything because of all that detail that we've been talking about. So it keeps coming back to how much information is there, right? You are able to do more with the sharpening. In other words, and it kind of also ties in with the finer control piece, right? You're able to do more with sharpening, period, right? Also, you can use a raw file to switch over to other raw formats, go to a DNG file. Everything's kind of almost interchangeable. You swap it back and forth, right? And one other thing that never gets talked about, and that's proof of ownership, right? The raw files have all the camera data baked in. JPEGs do too, but JPEGs are much easier to manipulate. So if you're ever in a position where you've got to prove something, a JPEG could be brought into question. So for those of you that are uber copyright and security conscious, that's just something to consider, right? Some of the disadvantages of RAW. So number one, more work. You have to process it, right? You just do. Even if it's simply a matter of putting it in a program like Lightroom or Photoshop or Luminar or one of those, and then doing, file save as JPEG, okay? You've got to process it. You've got to go through another set of steps. But raw files are indeed designed and intended to be processed. Another thing, raw files require more storage, right? They are bigger files considerably. So if storage is an issue, which again, choose how you spend your dollars wisely. I don't mean to spend your money for you, right? But, if you're deciding between, hey, I want to get another flash, I need more storage, storage is pretty up there in terms of, and quality storage, by the way, is pretty up there in terms of its importance level. And it should rank maybe, neck and neck, if not a little bit ahead of your next piece of lighting gear or next modifier, etc. What goes on behind the scenes is incredibly important. So don't overlook that, okay? Raw format compatibility. even though obviously you're either going to shoot, Canon, Olympus, Nikon, Sony, Panasonic, or whatever, the raw formats are compatible against pretty much, every piece of software that's out there once the file's open. Okay. Um, Disadvantage, sharing, right? Sorry. I actually misspoke. Compatible in the software, not compatible in the sense that a Canon RAW file will not be read by a Sony camera, a Sony RAW file will not be read by an Olympus camera, etc. So there's two levels of compatibility, whereas a JPEG works in all the cameras, a JPEG works in all the software. Okay, that's a little better. Also from the standpoint of sharing, if you're going to share images and you expect people to be able to look at them in a web browser or anything like that, you've got to convert that raw file over to a JPEG or one of the newer JPEG type formats, because JPEGs are they're going to evolve a little bit. They're already evolving, but they're going to evolve a little bit probably in the next 5 years. And we probably won't be using a standard JPEG format. Don't panic, gang. You don't have to go back and change all your JPEGs, and you'll still be able to open all your old JPEGs. They're not going to go away. It's not like, oh my God, Armageddon is coming and you're not going to be able to access your files. No, 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 no. It's just that there are newer, more efficient, better compression versions of JPEGs that are out there. And that's being driven by the internet and the idea that we want to click on a link and we want to see it like that, right? So it's all good. Nothing to panic about, nothing to worry about. You don't have to know every little thing about it right now, but do pay attention to the fact that there are other JPEG formats. And of course, keep in mind, Apple has their HEIC format also, which is web compatible. I don't think that's going to win out over JPEGs, just my opinion, but it's all out there. So you should stay aware of it. Okay. So also keep in mind too, while we're on the disadvantage list, and I consider these to be small disadvantages, but nonetheless, they're, pros and cons for everything, right? With a raw file, you've actually got more files to manage, because for every raw file, there's going to be a sidecar file, a .xmp file. That's the file that basically stores all the adjustments that you have made to the raw file, because the raw file itself never gets altered, which that's a plus, okay? And then, last but not least, because of all this additional file size, if you're going to do backups, especially offsite backups through like Backblaze or Backblaze Cloud or Amazon Cloud, it's going to take a little bit longer because you've got more files and more file size, right? So then we flip over to JPEGs. So let's do the same thing. And then we'll get to the point of how you can improve your learning curve. And believe me, it works. And I'm going to show you proof that it works. So stick with me, okay? So advantages for JPEG. When it comes out of the camera, it's already processed. Done. It's finished. Now, the worst part of it, so many people still need to do work on them. That's a problem, right? But the file comes out, everything about it is baked in. Color balance, color saturation, curve, sharpening, color space, everything, it's baked into the file. It's done. And there's only so much you can do to make changes. Part of that baking in process, it is compressed. So you hear your camera manufacturers refer to, generally the most common phrase is color engine. I don't know that all the manufacturers use the color engine. Some simply call it a color processor, most call it a color engine. Basically, it's not an engine that chugs along or gets turned on. That's the software, right? So along with the sensor, that's the software that does the processing in camera. That color engine varies from one camera to the next. And it's basically a piece of software that is looking at that raw image the camera's recording and say, okay, I can get rid of this one. I can get rid of this zero. Actually, I can get rid of these two zeros. I can get rid of this one, this one, this one, this zero, this one, this zero, this one, this zero. And then it bakes everything in and it's done, right? So advantages still, and I don't actually consider that an advantage, but technically, since the job is done, we'll call that an advantage. Small footprint, meaning, not a lot of file size. JPEGs are dramatically smaller in size. Even a, full-size JPEG, full res, is going to be dramatically smaller than the raw file. Compatibility, I kind of mentioned that in the cons for raw files. JPEGs are compatible across the board. You can take a JPEG out of a Canon camera, stick it in a Sony camera, like on a memory card, and the Sony camera is going to read that file, right? So they're compatible pretty much everywhere. They don't slow your camera down. If you want to be able to shoot crazy high-speed bursts and just lay on that shutter and run it for a long period of time, well, since the JPEG files are smaller, they're not going to load up the buffer, which is the RAM of the camera, nearly as fast, which means you can run that crazy high frame rate for a lot longer before the camera has to write to the disk, right? So, hint, that's one of those specialized situations where JPEG can be better if you actually need that. The reality of it is unless you're doing very specialized shooting, you don't need that. But we'll get back to that. You do have the option to choose what kind of compression you're going to do with JPEGs. Generally not in camera, but in post-production, you can modify them a little bit, and faster backups because they're smaller, right? So number one, you're going to have half the number of files because basically for every raw file, you have a sidecar file, so it, doubles it. So you got half the number of files, and they're smaller. So disadvantages. Let's flip the script, and then we're done with the comparison. Raw files, I said, are lossless, meaning no compression, nothing. JPEG files, generally, and there are several different ways that you can compress a JPEG file, but the default, the standard, is a lossy compression, right? So it's basically your camera's software using an algorithm that is basically throwing away some of the data, period. The higher the compression rate in the file, the more degradation to the image quality, and the more potential there is for banding in areas that have really nice, subtle tonal ranges. Okay, so JPEGs, basically they're 8-bit, right? So we talked about that early on. That puts a hard limit of 16.8 million colors on that file. So you don't have nearly as wide a gamut to work with, right? Still doesn't mean it's bad. It's going to depend on your needs, plain and simple, okay? Limited recovery options, meaning if you screwed up your exposure, overexposed it, underexposed it, or exposed it perfectly but blew out, like the highlights, maybe using a rim light, and you blew out the hair or something like that, it's going to be almost impossible on a JPEG to recover. If it's gone, it's gone. You better be amazing at some advanced Photoshop retouching tricks to be able to get it back, because it's not in the file. You're not going to be able to do it, okay? And much more so than a raw file, while we're talking about the negative, okay? Since the camera's processing that JPEG image and it's coming out baked in, your camera settings are extremely important and they have much more impact, meaning you have got to have proper exposure on your files. So if you're going to shoot JPEG in camera and you overexpose by 2 stops, that image is done. You might as well throw it away, period, because it's not going to be usable and it's not going to be recoverable. And that, folks, that piece right there, that negative about JPEGs, camera settings impact JPEG images. With JPEGs, you've got to get your exposure right. That is the premise for the suggestion that I'm going to make to you. And actually, I'm going to put it out as a challenge to some of you. Sincerely. I want to see you grow a pair and try this. And I want to see you try it more than once. Now, before I tell you what this is, I want to make something clear. After I explain it to you, I'm going to reveal a piece of information about my shooting history that will surprise you. And then I'm going to show you proof. And I want to show you that it can be done. Okay? So, number one, the task that I'm going to give you, the challenge, is to do a series of shoots, or if you're all in, pick a period of time, 3 months, 6 months, even a year. Some of you are thinking, I couldn't do this for a year. I know where he's going. I couldn't do this for a year. No, I did it for a lot more than a year, and shoot only JPEG for everything. Everything. In other words, shoot like a film shooter. You've got to get the exposure right in camera. And even when you have scenes with extreme lighting, you got to think old school and you got to figure out, how can I photograph this so that everything that's important has detail, and where can I let things blow out and where won't it matter, etc. It's a little extra work. It's a little scary. It's kind of like living on the edge. Alvaro, JPEG is the same as shooting with slides. That's absolutely correct. It's just like shooting film. And, interestingly enough, Alvaro's comment is correct. JPEG is the same as shooting with slides. However, when we were shooting with slides back in the day, we didn't have Photoshop to do any manipulation. You can still manipulate a JPEG somewhat. You just have to understand that you're extremely limited. You could be working on a raw file and say, you know what? I'm going to pump my shadows up to 30. I'm going to bring my highlights down by minus 40, okay? And everything's fine. With a JPEG, you might be able to pump your shadows up like +5 and bring your highlights down about -5. And anything beyond that, things are going to start to go really crazy in that image. So you're extremely limited. So the JPEG still, I would say it's got maybe a little more versatility than slides, but not much. And that is really the entire premise. So now let me reveal a piece of information that will surprise many of you. And I'm going to be completely honest because I'm not entirely proud of it. Makes me feel a bit stupid, honestly, but I'm going to share. So many of you have heard my story before. You know that I purchased my first professional digital camera in the year 2000. It was the Nikon D1. And then I quickly upgraded when it came out to the D1. I didn't do the H. I went from the D1 to the D1X and so on. So the D1 and the D1X were both like 2.74 megapixels. Whopping 2.47 or 74, 2.74 megapixels, right? Oh my God. And we're worried about cameras that only shoot 24 megapixels today. It's like, how did we ever take pictures? I mean, really, so freaking primitive. So the D1, and I'll be honest, some of you, if you want, you might be able to correct me on this. I didn't do any research. I told you, these last frames, I'm talking to you straight from the heart. No BS, no scripting, no razzle dazzle. If I remember correctly, the D1 still did not have RAW, or at least not RAW like we know it. It was a really, really big deal when the D1X came out and Photoshop RAW and Camera Raw plugin became a thing. I remember that was a huge deal. I personally, I didn't understand it. And I loved the camera. This is back, 2001, 2002, somewhere in there. I loved the camera. I loved shooting digital. I was getting great pictures. I was very happy with what I was doing. So everybody got all hyped about this RAW stuff. And keep in mind, please, back then, we didn't have 5 or 6 major photography blogs. YouTube wasn't really a thing. So you're reading this stuff in the photo magazines, and maybe you see an article via Google or something, but you weren't inundated with social media and everybody and their brothers oh, gotta shoot raw, shouldn't shoot raw. There was no debate. There was no people with big hair and silver hair arguing or any of that kind of stuff, right? It's just, this was a big new advancement. But I didn't see a need for it. So I didn't shoot RAW. I got my D1X. I probably set it on RAW once or twice just to see what happened, and then realized it was this whole different file format that I didn't know what it was. And then there was this, XMP thing. That was my thoughts at the time. It's like, I don't need this. I had been shooting film for so long. I could go into a studio. I could go on location. I could pay attention to my lighting. I could make adjustments to the lights. And this was long before we had wireless transmitters, gang. So we're talking, it was hard work. I had to walk 10 feet, 10 whole freaking feet to make an adjustment on the power of a strobe. I mean, it was tough back then, right? So I shot JPEGs. I made good money. I shot JPEGs as my primary file format until about 2008, 2009, when I started to forcefully transition a little bit more. And I'll tell you why I finally did in a moment. And then by 2011, I was 100% raw files 100% of the time. So that puts me at basically 10 years that I've been shooting raw, even though I've been shooting digital since the year 2000. So what finally persuaded me to start paying more attention to raw was the fact that I was doing a lot more compositing. And even back in the early 2000s, for modeling portfolios, I would routinely do beach pictures or like pictures of a girl dressed in nurse's scrubs. And I would put in a hospital background to make it look like she was really, in a hospital. But they were really simple kind of, background cutouts. They weren't really that challenging or that difficult to do. It wasn't the more advanced type of compositing that I'm doing now. So I was fine doing them with JPEGs too. But as I started to get a little bit more creative with the compositing, my beauty shots were developing and I was doing new and interesting and different things with them. That's when I started to realize, like, okay, the raw file is indeed going to give me a whole lot to work for. Plus, nobody's perfect. So, in that 10-year period, I screwed up a couple times. Didn't have the exposure dialed in quite as much as I should have. Now, that was not a frequent thing. That was a very rare scenario because, of course, that also meant that I wasn't paying attention to that while I was shooting. So it was a very rare situation that happened, but yeah, it happened. So those are the things that precipitated, like, all right, I need to pay more attention to raw. And by then, there were people, still not with big hair and gray hair, but there were people that were, raw is it. You need to be shooting raw. And of course, by that time, I had gone through several iterations of cameras since the Nikon D1. And indeed, every camera manual, because I'm one of those weird people that does actually read the camera manual. Every camera manual tells you shoot raw, right? So it was time. And then I made the switch. But just to show you that it can be done and that I've done it, and that it can even be done with nuanced lighting, I want to go ahead and switch my screen over here. So this is just from a shoot. This is from 06. So this is kind of in the middle of my JPEG digital years, right? This is from a young girl that I did a modeling portfolio shoot for. And you can look up above me and you can see as we go through, I'm not going to hit every single frame, but the exposures are consistent. Is that one soft or is it just not rendering here? They're not all rendering. The exposures are consistent. You don't see my exposures going light, dark, light, dark, light, dark all over the place, okay? The exposures are consistent. There is nothing blown out. All of the detail is where it needs to be. Because you notice, like in this particular picture, right? I am using rim lights behind my subject, okay? And I've got 2 lights in the front. You still have detail in the hair. None of the highlights are blown out, etc. Right? So that's the key. Okay. So again, just going through a whole shoot and again, guys, these are what, like 14 years ago, 15 years ago, these pictures were taken. They were for a modeling portfolio at the time. This young lady was a first time model. But I want you to see the fact that you can shoot in JPEG and you can shoot consistently. So what do you learn by doing this? Right? I'm waiting for somebody to say, okay, Joe, but why? The point is, everything you do with your lighting, and look at my previous talk chats. Ajax, thank you so much for the super chat. And yeah, Ajax, actually it would. Ajax said here, in fact, I want to put it on the screen so that you guys can see this. Let's see, shooting only in JPEG would rid me of my bad habit of slightly underexposing and fear of blowing out the highlights. Absolutely. And look, let me be really clear. There is more work in doing this because you got to be more careful. You've got to take a couple more test shots. In the case of what Ajax is mentioning, like, if he's got highlights that he doesn't want to blow out, you're basically going to do test shots and you're going to be pushing that exposure to get those highlights as bright as you can without them disappearing. That's when you use the blinky feature, right? And on your screen so that you're seeing where am I blowing out highlights. It's more work, but it's creating a discipline. So I'm suggesting this, and sadly, if we come back 2 weeks from now, there will probably be about 3,000 people that watch this video. And not that I'll have the opportunity to interview all 3,000 people, but I'm willing to bet not more than 10 people will actually try what I'm recommending. And it's unfortunate because it's lazy. This suggestion that I'm giving you is something that will increase the quality of your photography faster than anything else. If you are struggling at all, even occasionally, with blown out highlights, really, really dark shadows, you're loading your images into Lightroom or into Photoshop and looking in Bridge, and your exposures are all over the place. They're not consistent. And by the way, gang, this applies not just in studio work like you see me doing. I don't care if you're going out and you're shooting landscapes. If you're out and shooting landscapes and you're loading your images down and it's like overexposed, underexposed, overexposed, underexposed, why? That is just plain sloppy. That is not good photography. Okay? I got a lot of people typing in what they do. I don't know if you folks are new to my show or not. Let me just explain something. I don't care what you do. I'm not going to debate you. I'm teaching. I'm offering a suggestion for people to try. So by you stating, well, I do this, good for you. If your work is amazing and you don't have any exposure problems, then keep doing it. You're not really helping anybody by saying what you do, because I don't see anybody asking, hey, what does everybody do? And I didn't ask. If you have room for improvement in your photography, maybe what you ought to do is actually try it. Because the best part of it is you can abandon this concept at any point in time, right? Because at the end of the day, these images that you're looking at, if it wasn't for the fact that you can see the file name that says JPEG, you don't know that it was shot as a JPEG. You just see a picture. And Eric, thank you so much, man. I appreciate it. You make an evaluation on the picture just like anybody else does. Because here's the thing, folks. The only people that have ever asked me about my pictures being raw or JPEG are people like you that are watching this live stream or watching this video later and own cameras. This young lady, she didn't care. What this young lady wanted is she just wanted to be able to get signed by an agency, period, right? That's what she wanted. And the best part is she did. She got signed by an agency and she made money. Mission accomplished. That's the idea, right? So I'm giving you these as examples of how it can help you learn. I'm going to go ahead here and I'll open up just another shoot just to give you an example. So here's another set, because in this particular set, these are from 06 also, okay? You'll see at the end, one of my early beauty shots. In fact, it's the beauty shot that is on the cover for this show. It's a JPEG, not RAW. And it's a JPEG actually with really messy hair. So I did have to do post-production on it because this was really early on in my learning curve and my adventure of shooting these beauty and fashion portraits. But again, I want you to see, whoops, I jumped really fast there, sorry. I want you to see the consistency in the exposures, okay? You can do it with discipline. You're not seeing parts of the image being blown out. Even in that very high key shot, light background, there is detail through all of her hair. None of it is lost. So it's an image shot as a JPEG that is properly exposed. Okay? And just so you guys don't think I'm making any of this up here, let's do file info. Let me bring it over here. So here, this one was shot with a Nikon D1X with a 105 lens, 1/125th f4 ISO 640, because it was shot with the DIY fluorescent lights that I first became known for on YouTube. But you can see right there, no games, nothing fancy. That's it. Straight out of camera, period. Okay? So if I go down to the end of this young lady's shoot, and even, in these shots, I know it doesn't always translate, but I promise you there is detail all through the front of this hat. It's very white, but the detail's there. There's none of the detail is lost, okay? So let's get down here to the, I mentioned before about how I was doing composites in the early days with JPEGs. So this picture in the finished image, the background would have been cut out. She would have been in a hospital setting, okay? The reason I do those shots, by the way, or did those shots, I should say, this young lady was from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Philadelphia is the largest medical advertising market in the United States. So for those of you that want to shoot modeling portfolios for young women, understand it's not about taking a bunch of like really cool, sexy pictures of how hot is she. No, it's about taking pictures that show that person in the type of modeling scenarios that she might actually get hired to do. Darren, thank you so much for the super chat, man. I really, really appreciate it. Okay. So yeah, for any young woman that came to me in the Philadelphia market for years, if she was between the ages of like 18 and 35, guaranteed I was going to do a picture of her dressed as a nurse or in like a white lab coat and do like a pharmaceutical thing, because Philadelphia, the Philadelphia area, also happens to be home to 3 of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. So it's a big medical and pharmaceutical market. In my studio, I actually had the IV bag, the drip. I had several different sizes of scrubs. I had the stethoscopes. Those were all props that I owned because it was a very common image. And the best part of it is, guys, and this is why you have to do your research if you're going to be in business and if you're going to help models, the modeling agencies in Philadelphia hated these pictures of the nurse. Hated it because it wasn't cool, because it wasn't glamorous, because it didn't have a fashion vibe. But every one of those agencies would also tell you they made a lot of money off of Joe Edelman's nurse pictures because their models got booked. So why would the model get booked better with this picture? It's real simple. When the girl goes out for a casting, if they're looking for somebody to portray a nurse, which again, in Philadelphia, that's actually very common. You would think that the people at the casting and the advertising people and the marketing people, that they could look at various girls and maybe just say, hey, could you put your hair in a ponytail and say, oh yeah, look, she'd look perfect as a nurse. You'd think they could do that. And the fact of the matter is they probably could. But in the corporate world, there's this thing called CYA, cover your ASS. Instead of going back to the boss and saying, look at this hot chick, she'll be perfect, they can go back to the boss and say, look, here's the nurse. And the boss is like, oh my God, that's exactly what I had in mind. Boom, that person's butt is covered. Everybody's happy because they already know what this girl's going to look like as a nurse, which is what the casting was for. Okay. So scrolling on down to the end here. Again, these are some of the very first beauty shots that I ever did. It was like 05, 06 that I stumbled into this concept of these beauty shots and started playing with it. So this one, obviously very kind of commercial, very much an advertising vibe. And then down at the end here, we're going to see the image that, here we go. So, and again, even back in 06, you guys hear me talk about work your shot. In other words, don't assume that your first idea is your best idea. I was kind of digging this. I liked it, but I realized the background shouldn't match the jacket. So I wanted to change the color. So I started to darken it a little bit, add a little bit more orange in it. And then I wanted to get a little bit more pink and orange on her. So here you can see how the background's evolving and the lighting's tweaking ever so slight. You can also see I went from looking straight on to starting to get lower and lower and lower below her. As I got lower, the neck was too much. Like here, the neck's bothersome. The shadow's not doing anything. The light area of the neck's not doing anything. So bring the jacket up higher, fill it in, okay? Trying a different crop, etc. All of these were handheld at the time. And it's like, all right, that's cool. But at this point, like, it's neat, but I just didn't feel like I had a picture. Not that was like making me be like, whoa, yeah, okay? And you can see, I mean, look at this young lady. She's Eastern European, so she's got a very distinctive jawline. So sticking with the low angle, because I'm thinking at this point, I really want to accentuate that jaw. I decided to change the shape of the jacket because the background was I was digging the background now. And I went with this look. And it's like, yeah, I mean, it's dramatic. It's not bad, but I still just wasn't feeling like I was there. Next thing I tried was this kind of tight angle thing. Hated this right out of the box. Just, I hate it now, hated it then. This to me just like took everything away from the idea. It just wasn't cutting it. And then I stumbled on and because back then, by the way, I was only a few years out from film and I wasn't shooting videos yet. So the overwhelming majority of my images in 2006 were vertical, not horizontal. You guys hear me talk all the time now about how the overwhelming majority of what I shoot is horizontal because it's probably going to go in a video or it's going to go in a presentation. Well, back then, I wasn't doing any of that. So the overwhelming majority of what I shot was indeed vertical. Horizontal, it was very rare for me to turn a camera horizontal on a headshot. Period. It was very rare for me to do that. But this is where it kind of started to come together. This is where, because I did have some shadow back in, I was getting the very, very dramatic jawline, and I was also getting more color on the side of her face. And it was one of these frames in here that wound up becoming the finished one. And that's where I got to my picture. Okay. But even as you can see, shooting a modeling portfolio for someone, and again, I realize this isn't the topic of the night, but I want you guys to see I'm doing images that are in natural settings. I look at payphones. You can tell how old that is, right? Very kind of casual things with updos, so we see the full face. Just casual outfits, body shots, fitness things. This is another shot where I would have dropped in a background after the fact. That's why the background is clean, so it's a real super simple cutout. And you could see, even back in the early days of Photoshop, where we didn't have the tools we have now, I made it a point to make sure that all the edges, including around her hair and everything, super clean. So this picture was taken with the intent, hey, I'm going to cut the background out. Made it really, really, really easy to do. Okay. So anyway, I'll show you one more here that similarly, I wanted to show you this series because this series includes some outdoor pictures with snow. Meaning, if you're shooting an automatic, everything's underexposed. Done. Looks like crap. Okay. So all these shots are done with the model playing around outside in snow. Notice I have detail in the snow. Her face isn't underexposed. Snow is actually a great reflector. You get gorgeous light shooting models and portraits in snow. Okay. But there is such a thing as a right exposure that's going to give you the balance, right? In this case, my mistake was, as she brought her hand forward, her hand went into the sun. Where she was standing, she was in the shade. She brought her hand forward, the hand was in the sun. So obviously that shot didn't get used because you can see there's no detail in the hand, no detail in the snow. It's gone because that part's in the sun, everything else is in the shade. So part of my trick was keep her in the shade. If I keep her in the shade, the lighting, even on the snow, is more even. Okay. So same thing. She hit the sun, boom. Then similarly, kind of a little jogging set. I think this was probably the one that we went with. It was one of those in there. So shooting in studio, out studio. These were outdoors where I used sunlit sun in the background to get that kind of blown out background. But I wanted to make sure that I had a nice, soft, even light on her and good exposure. Back inside to the studio. And then some of my really, really early beauty shots. So this is 05. Early beauty shots, early attempts. You can see even here wrapping something around her head. So for those of you that are just starting out and like you try stuff like this where you just wrap something around the head and when they're done, they kind of look like they have a weird bonnet on their head. I did that too. Don't stress. Keep exploring. Keep trying things. Okay? No, nobody gets to the end result right out of the box. You just don't. It takes years and years and years. So for me, this was what, 16 years ago. And this was, again, one of my first, beauty shots that I did along the way. Okay. So again, gang, the point is, I mean, what I'm telling you, let's be clear, right? Because I know that especially once people get a chance to comment on this in YouTube, there's going to be some people that are going to be like, Jared says this, Tony says this, I think this. Even tonight, I know there's probably a couple people that left because I kind of pointed out that them telling me what they like to do doesn't help anybody, right? But the point is, this is a technique that will help you, but you got to commit to it. It will help you create discipline, right? So it's just like anything else. If you're willing to put in the work, then, you can get the job done, right? So I would encourage you, maybe you're not confident enough, or, maybe you're at a point where you're starting to make some money, not all the time, but starting to. And for situations like that, you're just not careful taking the risk if you see it as a risk. So maybe for those shoots, of course, you go ahead and you shoot raw, right? But for other stuff, maybe it's just stuff that you're shooting for fun, for this, for the heck of it. Go ahead and try the idea of setting your camera on JPEG. But, you know, be organized. And what I mean by that is pay attention. If you shoot 300 frames, I'm just picking a random number. Have a sense when you're done, how many of those frames did I have to toss because the exposure was bad? Meaning there were things that were blown out, okay? Things where there was no detail. By the way, I wanted to show you just this one really quick. This picture here on my website, that was a shot that was done in 2005 as a JPEG, okay? So it's an exercise that will speed up the process. One of the things that I do with the folks in my mentoring group, and I'm not going to picture my mentoring group, you should check it out, okay? But the fact is, what I do with a lot of them that are trying to learn lighting is I take them all the way back to the beginning, and I only let them use one light. And they have to master one light. And by the way, when I say one light, I mean one light, no modifier. And then once they've mastered getting good light with one light, then they get to add a reflector. And I highly encourage them to use the $1 foam core reflector, right? Once they've mastered that, then they get to add an umbrella, simple umbrella, little umbrella, like an umbrella like this, like a little Westcott, right? You open this up, it's a 21-inch white shoot-through umbrella. You can get these for like $21, right? You see, that's all the bigger it is. So in relationship to my head, you see how big it is. You don't need a 60-inch umbrella. In fact, this umbrella right here, gang, you can shoot great full-length images with this umbrella. You just can. And it folds up uber small. This is one of the light modifiers that I travel with, when we're not in the middle of a pandemic, okay? And then once they master the umbrella, then they go ahead and they move up to a softbox, or like a collapsible softbox or collapsible beauty dish, and so on. And then they add a second light. And you do it progressively, you'll learn so much more. You'll learn so much more faster. Because what happens then, when you get to the point where you're finally ready to add the second light, everything you do with that light screams at your brain. And you're going to pay much, much more attention to it so that you're not overexposing things or underexposing things because of the second light, or creating horrible shadows from the second light. When you start out with 2 or 3 lights to learn, you overwhelm yourself, and it simply doesn't help. It just really doesn't. So anyway, actually I have a few minutes. There's a couple questions in here, so I want to go back through some of these. Hey, do me a solid, seriously, if you're still here and if you're finding any of this useful, hit the thumbs up. It would be greatly appreciated, okay? So let me go back through some of these comments here from M. Watching from United Arab Emirates. Big thanks for the lessons and the time you spend to teach each other for free. Thank you. I really appreciate the kind words, okay? Charlie, you used fluorescent lights for her shots, didn't you? Just looking at her eyes says it. Yeah, so those images that I was showing you guys back then, I shot a lot of images with those lights because I kind of got in a groove where it's like, oh, it's cool. I won't lie to you, Charlie. Now those catch lights drive me nuts, okay? So, Alvaro, I don't know who you are, man, but I got to tell you, you're annoying me. I'm just keeping it real. So why not shooting JPEG and RAW? So here's what you have to understand about a question like that. That's the kind of question that is just pure crap. But hear me out. I'm not trying to be a jerk. I want to teach you something. I want to teach you something so that you can be a productive person in a community like this. My response to you, if I'm not going to give you a hard time, is, well, what am I shooting? You're saying, why not shoot in JPEG and RAW? What am I shooting? Because for what I shoot, Alvaro, you see, I shoot in a studio most of the time. I mean, sometimes I'm out shooting my grandkids, but even here, let me switch over. Even when I'm shooting images like these, okay, which is, all stuff that I've done with Olympus, has nothing to do with the kind of work that I normally do, I'm still just shooting RAW. So Why do I need to shoot RAW and JPEG? Because I don't need that extra file. JPEGs for me, Alvaro, they're the files that I put on the internet, like you see here. They're the files that I deliver to clients so that they can put them on the internet, right? So when you just ask an open-ended question like that, there's no value to that. There's no benefit. In fact, it's either something that you do, meaning it works for you, or it's something that you learned in a YouTube video from some idiot that didn't give it context. I'm trying to teach you with context. So let's take your concept and let's ask the question, what would be the benefit of shooting RAW and JPEG? So obviously it depends on what you're shooting. Really, it depends on what you're shooting more than anything else. I firmly believe those photographers who shoot RAW and JPEG just so they have extra stuff to work with, no, there's no point. If you shoot RAW, you got everything you need. But let's just say hypothetically, you have to go photograph an event. And immediately after that event is over, I'm talking like immediately, like that day, you need to provide your client with JPEGs that they can put up on their corporate website. Okay, or their social media. That would be a great example of a time that you are potential. And then later you're going to deliver, more refined processed images. That would be a great time to shoot RAW plus JPEG. However, think about the example that I just gave you. In that example, it's not good enough to just shoot RAW and JPEG. In that example, you have to do exactly what I've been proposing. You have to make sure that you are getting it right in camera, that you are nailing that exposure. Because otherwise, the JPEGs that you deliver right after the event make you and your client look like crap. So I've given you one example. Now, you may turn around and say to me, well, no, I don't have to deliver anything right after the event. Okay, I get that, but that's my point, right? It's all about context. There's absolutely no reason that you have to shoot RAW and JPEG all the time. And there's really no benefit to do it all the time. Are there circumstances where that simply makes sense? Absolutely. Because understand, when you shoot RAW plus JPEG, you've got 3 files for every click of the shutter. 3. You've got your RAW, your sidecar, and your JPEG. And you've got to keep them all organized. That's a lot more work. It's a lot more work. There's no technical benefit to shooting RAW plus JPEG. So listen closely to what I said there. No technical benefit. There are sometimes practical benefits depending upon what you're shooting, the circumstances, and what you need to deliver and when you need to deliver it. Those are the things to keep in mind, right? So shooting RAW plus JPEG as a solution to a problem, 100%, I support that because there are problems that are solved the best that way. But to do it as a habit, to do it as a rule, I've never heard anybody give me a scenario where that makes sense. To do it as a habit and a rule, meaning all the time. So, but let's flip it one more time. If at the end of the day that makes you feel better, if at the end of the day it makes you feel more comfortable, then do it. Obviously, you need more hard drive space. It's going to take you longer to download things. It's going to take you longer to upload things. If you're okay with that, then that's absolutely fine. I mean, it's not up to me to say you can't do it. I'm not saying never do it. I'm just saying that I really don't see why you would do it, right? Unless you have a special need, okay? All right, let's see here. Scrolling back up. So Alvaro, also your comment about every time you save a JPEG, it degrades. No, it doesn't. Sorry. Okay. From Lane. Oh, whoops, I'm clicking on the wrong thing here to get the question. I'm sorry, Lane. Let me try this one more time. Can compression of JPEG pics have increased artifacts due to the compression algorithm? No. However, okay, where you do kind of run into the artifact issue, Lane, is if you are recompressing a JPEG. So let's say you shoot JPEG in camera. You take that JPEG into Lightroom, you take that JPEG into Photoshop or Skylum, Luminar, whatever, any of those, DxO, you name it. And then you decide, I want to sharpen it a little bit. So now is the situation where Alvaro was saying, well, every time you save it, it degrades. Yeah, because you've made a change. So what's going to happen is, you've taken this compressed file, you're sharpening it. And just like I was talking about adjusting color and highlight and shadow before on a JPEG, if you sharpen a JPEG more than 1 or 2 or 3 notches, you're going to start to get artifacts, right? And then you resave it. At that point, yes, it's going to recompress things. So you're likely going to make it worse and make the artifacts worse. The other challenge you run into, which you still run into with RAW, is if you have a scenario where you have chromatic aberration and you get that kind of purplish or green fringing around your subjects that are especially on like really bright backgrounds. Well, it's so much easier to get that out in RAW and to manipulate the colors to make it go away than it is in a JPEG, because in a JPEG, everything's baked in and you can't manipulate the colors as easily and as independently as you can with the RAW file. Okay. Let's see here. Sliding on up. Jan. Whoops, I'm still clicking on the wrong one. What happens to the infrared light that comes into the camera? Is it in the RAW file? Jan, I have no idea. I don't shoot infrared, so I'm not even going to guess. I'm assuming since you're asking that question, you're referring to a sensor that is modified for RAW. But yeah, I honestly have no idea, so I wouldn't even want to take a guess and send you down the wrong path. I would reach out to some people that shoot infrared, and they'll be able to give you a much more accurate answer. Okay. All right. I thought I had one more question up here. Maybe not. Maybe that was it. All right, gang. So let's see. Mickey says, well, so same thing we talked about with Alvarez. I like editing raw files. I shoot both RAW and JPEG. Again, Mickey, if it works for you, good for you. But if you're just doing it as a rule of thumb, there's zero benefit to that. Zero. There are circumstances where it absolutely makes sense. So it's kind of like, whatever works for you. Shooting the RAW and the JPEG isn't making your photography any better. It's not making your pictures any better. JPEG just gives you kind of an SOOC, straight out of camera file that you can go do something with. But as a person that pays their bills with a camera, I look at any workflow that I do. And for those of you that are looking to make money, keep this in mind, right? I look at any workflow that I do from, kind of the cost benefit aspect, right? What's it going to cost me? Because I'm sorry, but it costs you money to shoot RAW and JPEG. People are like, well, I got a digital camera, I can, shoot like crazy. It doesn't matter. No, it costs you money, right? Because you've got all that extra files, all that extra file space, bandwidth to get the files back and forth to the cloud, because you should be doing cloud backups, that kind of thing. So you just have to look at it from the standpoint of, what's the real benefit? What am I getting out of it? And then you go from there. Alvaro, this is a great question. Good recovery, Alvaro. Thank you. So, you've been frustrated in a shoot for not getting the photo that you were looking for. How did you handle that feeling so that it doesn't block you? So I'll give you two answers. I'll give you kind of the Joe from, let's say, 10 or 15 years ago or 20 years ago to the Joe now. Old Joe, back then, it would block me. The longer that I worked on the idea without it coming together, I would get more and more frustrated. And frustration, gang, it's a block. It is absolutely a block. Okay. And so for me, what I had to learn was honestly confidence in my my abilities and confidence in my determination, meaning the idea I talk about all the time of work the shot. The confidence of knowing that if I've got an idea, even though it's not working out, it's not coming together, if I keep trying, keep experimenting, keep move things, adjust things, kind of like I showed you guys with that one beauty shot, I know that 9 times out of 10, not 100% of the time, but 9 times out of 10, I'll get to a picture that I'm very happy with. And then part of the learning curve there is understanding that 1 time out of 10, it's just not going to come together. And those are the times where you say, okay, this is not going to work, period. And what you do is you walk away, you move on to something else that day while you're shooting. But then when you're done and you're away from the studio and you're sitting in front of computer screens, you look at the images that you shot and you ask yourself a couple simple questions. Why? Why don't I like the picture? Here's a bunch of attempts that I made. Why don't I like them? And then the follow-up question, the simple one, well, simple question, takes some work to answer it. What could I do differently to make it work? Especially, Alvaro, with those beauty shots that I do, sometimes a shot doesn't work because it's the wrong model. In other words, maybe the wrong shaped eyes, the wrong shaped nose, wrong shaped jaw. It's not about being pretty or not. It's just the shape doesn't work for the camera angle or the lighting. Sometimes the makeup doesn't work. In other words, we tried to do something on the wrong face and it didn't actually flatter that face. Sometimes the hair didn't work. Same idea. It didn't flatter the face, didn't fit the idea. Sometimes my lighting didn't work. I had this really cool lighting with all kind of cool colors, but it just didn't really jive with the idea. It happens. And you move on. You learn from it. You take the time and you learn from it. If you want to be a great photographer at any point in your life, you have to embrace failure. You have to seek out failure. Failure is the result of experimenting. Failure is the result of being creative. Failure is the result of pushing yourself outside your box. You have to be okay with failure. It's part of the process. Okay? All right. So let's see. Now, of course, that it's 7 o'clock, all of you come in with questions here. So let me just hit a couple of these really quick. Dwayne, any opinion on shooting prime versus zoom for portraits? Whatever you're comfortable with, Dwayne. I used to shoot in fact, these images that you saw me show earlier tonight, most of them were done with either like a 105 or the 70 to 200 zoom. 70 to 200 was kind of my go-to. Today, if you're following my current work, almost everything is with a 90 millimeter equivalent or a 150 millimeter equivalent. I shoot, micro four thirds. So I'm shooting the 45 millimeter f1.2 or the 75 millimeter f1.8, mainly because at this point in my career, I don't want to have to deal with all that big, heavy stuff, right? So I tend to go with primes. But I would say work with what you have. Don't let anybody tell you that you'll get better images with a zoom or with a prime. That's crap. Work with what you have, right? Let's say you've got a 70 to 200 and somebody's telling you, oh, yeah, you got to get an 85 f1.8. That's not going to make your pictures better. It's just not. Because everything that you can do with the 85 1.8, you can do with the 70 to 200 2.8 if you actually understand depth of field. So that bokeh that you get with the 85 1.8, you can get almost the same bokeh out of the 70 to 200 f2.8. But you have to understand depth of field. So if you want to be lazy, you spend the money for the 1.8, right? If you really understand what you're doing, you solve the problem with what you have. That's just how it works. Okay. Let's see. Dwayne, great work as usual. Who do you use for cloud storage and any recommendations for having your site built on format? I'm not great with website building. So let's work backwards. I am 1,000% in favor of format as a web hosting company, much more so than Squarespace or any of the others. Best price options, number one. This is a company that builds sites for creatives. So all their template designs are designed to really highlight images and artwork, etc. And the best example I'll give you, okay, is, look at some of these images like this image here and go to my website and do it, but make it as big as you can on your computer screen, right? Make it as big as you can on your computer screen and look at the clarity and the detail of the way the image resizes. Look at how you can count every single eyelash on her face. You won't be able to do that with Squarespace. You just won't. Not without uploading a massive file, because here's the other cool thing. Google is in the process of rolling out a whole new set of web metrics. It's called Core Web Vitals. Next month, Google is changing their algorithms for how they rate web pages, okay? So the best part of this is my website, the first couple of pages that you go to are from format. You can see the link down in the bottom corner here. Once you click through to like about and all that, this is a WordPress website. None of you need WordPress websites. I have a lot of special functionality. That's why I do that. But all the big pictures, these pages still have great page speed, meaning Google's going to love them and they will get ranked in Google. They're not going to get penalized for having really, really big pictures. So, that's important. As far as cloud storage, Dwayne, I use Backblaze and I use two versions of Backblaze. One is the Backblaze Personal that backs up everything that's on my computer and my two video drives, which are like video work drives. And then I use Backblaze Cloud that backs up my 64 terabyte network drive, my NAS. And that gets backed up to Backblaze Cloud. Backblaze, hands down, it's the best that's out there in terms of price and everything else. So I highly recommend them. So Cosmo just pointed out, which is very true. Format is Canadian. Yeah, they're based in, I believe, Toronto is where they're at. So if you're paying with American dollars, you get a little bit of a discount in the process, which you do. Okay. So, and here, one last question was up here that I passed. Sorry, I skipped by this really quick because I read it fast and I thought it was a joke. It's real. God Loves 365. What do you do when the room you're in is dark wall, dark ceiling, and dark floor? I'm not trying to be a smart ass, but you do photography. You set your lighting up and you do it, set up a background. I have to sign off because I'm 7 minutes over time, but I'll tell you what, God Loves 365. I promise you, if you come back next week and in the beginning of the show, give me a little bit more detail about what you're trying to do. Okay. Or, maybe reach out to me on Twitter or even in a community post underneath my video. Okay. Or excuse me, if you go to the main page of my YouTube channel and click on the community tab, you can leave a more detailed post there. Okay. And then I can help you out a little bit more, but I need a lot more detail. Like, what are you trying to shoot? What kind of lighting are you working with? Do you have backgrounds? How big is that room? If you give me that information, I'll help you solve your problems. I promise you, I will gladly help you solve your problems because there's a lot of good lessons that I can teach everybody by doing that. Okay. All right, gang. So a couple things really quick. Number one, please check out my website because there's been a whole bunch of changes lately and a bunch of really cool new stuff. Also, since I'm on the website, let me just show you next week. This is not going to be available again. It's the last time this is going to be made available. April 30th, 6 o'clock. So it's next Friday at 6 o'clock. Exposure. What is correct exposure? It's free. It's 90 minutes. If you are one of those photographers that is all proud of themselves because you know what the exposure triangle is, I hate to tell you, you've been duped. Because if you know what the exposure triangle is, you don't know squat for a bunch of reasons. The exposure triangle is nothing more than a memorization technique. This program will teach you about the real relationships between shutter speed, aperture, and that stupid thing that we call ISO, because there really is no ISO anymore, even though your camera manual says there is. You might want to check this one out. I guarantee you'll come away with a new outlook on how you set exposure, and it's a much more modern/current viewpoint than all that exposure triangle crap. So make sure you check that out. Also, please make sure you follow me, both on the YouTube community and on Twitter and on Instagram. Over the course of the next couple of days, I'm going to be posting some links to some recent podcast interviews that I was interviewed, but some really, really good information, especially for those of you that are interested in making money as a photographer. And this week, Talk Chat, the podcast. My special guest is Sony artisan, Mr. Miguel Giles. And I will tell you straight up, in addition to being an amazing photographer, he was an awesome guest to interview. He dropped a lot of really, really, really great tips, ideas, and suggestions. So you're going to want to make sure that you check out the Talk Chat Photography podcast. And you can find it. Just click on the podcast link on my website. You'll find all of the back issues. If you're into light painting, make sure you check out last week, Mr. Jason Page, awesome light painter. And he's the creator of light painting brushes, which are really, really cool. But you can check out the podcast there. Miguel's interview will go live on Friday. Be sure to check that out. And in the meantime, gang, have a great week. Pick up your cameras and shoot something. Because your best shot, it's your next shot. Adios, gang. Take care.